Howdy, this is Dean Tenant of Information Highwayman. You're watching Friday's Ace of Spades website review. And this week's website is KaylinDesigns.com, kindly recommended by Kaylin herself. Last week the review that I did went pretty long. It went to 19 minutes, so I had some comments saying this is way too long, you guys suck, so I'm going to go with a bit of a shorter format this week. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the checklist which I used last week. I've modified that slightly, and I'm just going to go through that checklist rather than going off on tangents all the time. So, the checklist is A, first impressions, and B, 1 to 5. First the headline, then the body copy, then the calls to action, then the eye path, and finally legibility. Now last week I talked about image smoother, and I've had a bit of a think about it, and I'm actually including image smoother under eye path and putting legibility as 0.5. So if you watched last week, there's something different, and that should make sense to you as I go through it. Alright, first impressions of Kaylin Design. There are a couple of things which I first noticed as soon as I loaded the site, especially on a widescreen monitor. There's a kind of cloying amount of white space, and the design has a tendency to stick to the left hand side and leave a lot of extraneous space on the right hand side, which makes it feel kind of claustrophobic in an ironic kind of way because there's so much extra space. The other thing that I noticed, you're not seeing it here, but when I actually loaded the site for the first time, it was extremely slow to load this whole bottom area here, everything with the image, the jewelry catalog and so on. It took about 45 seconds to load. It's obviously using some kind of JavaScript, had a little loading bar, but the loading bar didn't actually tell me what it was for. Not sure why there needs to be any kind of JavaScript there at all, since it looks like it could just be loaded straight out of your content management system. Generally speaking, if your website takes more than 7 seconds to load, that's too long, because if you haven't given your users a reason to stick around within 7 seconds, they're not gonna. Okay, the other first impression that I got was, what's up with the weird pixelization on Kaylin Design and elegant hand-forged art jewelry? These images look really, obviously this text is an image as well, look really pixelated, slightly jagged, and the reason for that seems to be that the image itself has been set in the markup at a different resolution than it was actually saved at, so the browser itself is trying to resize the image instead of displaying it as it should, and different browsers will display that differently. In Chrome it'll just look a little bit blurry as compared to Firefox where it looks terrible, but that's definitely something that you don't want happening. That's something to fix. Going to the checklist, the first thing we start with is the headline, and the headline here is elegant hand-forged art jewelry, for want of anything better. There is another headline further down, and you can see it here, celebrate the elegance of you. Now this is a better headline because it does include the word you. The word you is very interesting to prospects for obvious reasons, because it is about them. However, up here all we've got is basically a description of what you provide, which lacks any kind of differentiation from a description that any other hand-forged art jeweler may provide. I'm guessing that most jewelers probably say that their stuff is elegant, or could say that their stuff is elegant, and I'm guessing that anyone looking for hand-forged art jewelry is probably going to find that fairly uninteresting. It'll let them know that they're in the right place, so I'm not saying get rid of it, but you want to have some other kind of headline which is more interesting to them. And this is just far too far down the page. It's pretty much invisible, even on a very widescreen high-resolution monitor. I don't think you can see that until you actually scroll down, which is no good. Body copy style, on the other hand, is pretty good. I think that blogging has done a great deal for body copy in general on a lot of small business websites. Most small business owners these days are at least familiar with the concept of blogging if they don't do it themselves. If they don't do it themselves, I recommend they do. But the fact that people are comfortable with writing in a more informal, more conversational style in blogs has certainly overflowed into their websites. You'll see corporate websites these days which even use this kind of style, which is very unusual because, as you probably know, corporate websites in the past, and most of them even today, still use a horribly dry style. It makes your eyes bleed to read it. So the body copy style here is very conversational, it's very personal, it's obviously written by one person, and it's obviously intended to be directed towards another person, so that's very good. Number 3 is calls to action, and in this case we haven't really got any. There is this clickable link for Kalen at kalendesign.com, but it doesn't actually include any kind of text saying click here or, email me now, anything like that. And I'm guessing that most likely the primary objective for the site isn't actually to get people to click on that link, it's probably to get them to buy jewelry. So what I would suggest is to, as well as including pictures of the jewelry, have some sort of view more details link, some sort of add to cart link, anything like that, any kind of call to action which will get users doing what you want them to do. One little comment I would make here is that you're using captions, and that's excellent. Captions are very well read, but I would make it bigger because it's very hard to see. In terms of iPath, number 4 on the checklist, there's a problem here because there's pretty much nothing to really draw the eye in a logical way down the page. People read top to bottom, left to right, but what we've got here is we've got this big piece of jewelry sitting on the right hand side, which catches the eye immediately because it's kind of big and high up the screen. You've got the Kalen design, you've got this elegant hand forged art jewelry, all set on different horizontal sections, so they're not lined up together. And then you've got the catalogue for the jewelry with the various options below, but next to that there's a big image, and the image itself is the jewelry is really attractive and well photographed, but the background of the image is not so good because it's very pale and disappears into the rest of the page, which means it looks like there's a huge amount of white space there even though there isn't. Some kind of border might even help with that in that regard. Another issue with iPath, once you actually get down into the reading area, which is tricky because of this very haphazard appearance here, you've got a very good section all the way down with a lot of scannable elements, the nice little headlines here to keep people scanning if they don't want to read everything. But you've also got this mission statement down the right hand side, and as I mentioned in the previous webcast, having multiple columns is like having multiple people talking at once. I'm not sure that the mission statement really adds anything important to the front page of the site, so I would strongly recommend getting rid of that. The last thing is legibility, and in that regard the site is a mixture of good and bad. On the plus side, you've got everything set black on white, which is very legible. It's twice as legible as white on black. But on the minus side, you've got 11 pixel size font, which is really, really small. You can pretty much guarantee that anyone over the age of 40 who comes to this site and has to have a look at this text, if they're using a modern monitor, they're going to be squinting and cursing you and pretty much leaving because they can't actually read it. Generally speaking, unless you know for a fact that your prospects are young yuppies who like to see really small text like this, and I know that there are those kinds of people around, I've interacted with them in the past, they're mostly designers. Unless those are the sorts of people that you're aiming for, you want to be using a font size around about 16 pixels instead of 11. 11 is far too small. The other thing to bear in mind is, although I do this on my own site for aesthetics reasons, having all of your headlines set in uppercase is actually a lot more difficult to read than having the headline set in lowercase or sentence case. So if you've got long headlines, it's always a good idea to set them in sentence case, and I've actually started doing that in some of my documents recently. So that's the main stuff that I would talk about in terms of legibility. One other thing that I would mention, which isn't on the checklist but comes to mind, is the use of navigation here is a little bit strange. You've got these top navigation links which are pretty much where you'd expect them to be, and that's all good. The search button, the search field, I would probably put up there along with them rather than having it separated, because people expect it to be in the top right hand corner. These links, I mean, I understand what they're for. I'm not sure how many of your users will understand what they're for, and I'm not sure how effective they're going to be. They also don't seem all that important, and when you consider the fact that they're coloured as opposed to these other links which aren't. They really draw the attention. So I'm not sure whether that's something which you'd want to talk about, want to think about, and maybe address in terms of improving the usability of your site and getting people to click on the right things. Emphasizing something other than those links might be a good idea. I'd also probably move the jewelry catalog up to be on this bar, and while including it down here isn't necessarily a bad thing, simply having a link to the jewelry catalog up here is sort of what users expect. Separating out navigation into multiple sections can be a bit tricky, and I want to have a think about doing that. I probably have to think about the way that you could consolidate your navigation into something a little bit more useful, a little bit more user-friendly. So hopefully that's been helpful, and I'm not going to go any further. I know I've only looked at one page, but since last time I looked at all the pages on a site and it went real long, I've decided I'm just going to stick to the home page unless there's something really notable on other pages, and I didn't see anything particularly notable. So you can catch me again next week on the Ace of Spades. If you have any comments, questions, or hate mail, you are most welcome to email me, non@informationhighwayman.com. Hate mail in particular will be read and appreciated. I am always looking for a good laugh. And if you... subscribe. I'm a copywriter and I can't spell subscribe. You can subscribe to the Ace of Spades, which is a week daily... I hesitate to use the word newsletter. It's a week daily email that you'll receive, which contains marketing tips and copywriting tips. So that's completely free, and you can sign up at informationhighwayman.com/Ace of Spades. Until then, I will see you next Friday.